Welcome back, everybody. It's Friendly Potato here. I recently posted a short talking about the dark fantasy aesthetic and looking for a game that matches it. In that short, I specifically mentioned Dogma 2. So I went ahead and picked it up, played the first 5 hours, and I'm here to give you my first impressions. Let's jump right in. Dogma 2 is an open-world action RPG from Capcom. While it's the second entry in the series, it isn't a direct continuation of the first game's story. So if you haven't played the original, no worries, you can jump right into this one. It follows a brand new storyline set in the same world with familiar themes and features, which we'll dive into later. Without spoiling too much, you play as an Arisen, a chosen hero destined to protect over the realm. Over the course of your journey, you'll uncover the past, reclaim your rightful throne, and face off against towering monsters, all while exploring a vast, breathtaking fantasy world. For this first impression review, I'll be focusing on my experience with the first 5 hours of gameplay. I'll cover core gameplay feel, the game's presentation, its level of engagement and immersion, plus some pros and cons at the end. Why 5 hours? I think that's the sweet spot. Most casual players want to know if a game is fun within that time frame, say a weekend session or a few weeknights. If a game doesn't hook you by then, it might not be worth your time. With that in mind, let's jump into the first section, core gameplay. I've split the core gameplay section into a couple subsections, so we'll go ahead and get started with the controls and responsiveness. Overall, they feel good. The game is definitely designed with the controller in mind, but I've been playing on mouse and keyboard, and honestly, it feels just fine. Early on, I did keep fumbling inputs, especially when trying to open my alternative combat abilities, but on hour 3 or 4, I'd say, muscle memory had kind of kicked in, and it became a little bit easier. Once you get through that initial adjustment, everything feels pretty smooth and responsive overall. Next is combat in main loop. Combat is where Dogma 2 really shines. There's a ton of versatility. You can grab and throw items or even enemies at times. And when it comes to larger monsters, you can literally climb on top of them and stab away while hanging on for dear life. It's chaotic, funny, and just really super engaging, thinking about how to get through a specific combat encounter. I started out as a mage, and honestly, I didn't love it. Mages are more supportive, meant to hang back and kind of buff allies, cast bigger spells, and command their pawns to charge in or fall back. That playstyle just didn't click with me, so I swapped to a fighter and immediately started enjoying myself a lot more. And that's one of the strengths here. The game doesn't really lock you into one class. Speaking of classes, or vocations in this case, you can start as a fighter, thief, mage, or archer. You can switch these at any point in the game if one role isn't working for you. While your base stats grow automatically as you level, your skills and augment come with your chosen vocation. So you actually go to an inn and speak to someone to change up those skills and map the ones that you wanted to unlock, which kind of gives you the flexibility to match your play style. Next up is the pawn system. So this is a critical part of the core gameplay loop. The pawn system, I'd say, is probably the most unique system in the game. You can create your own AI companion that'll be with you throughout your journey. They'll fight and explore with you and even talk to you throughout. Honestly, they kind of talk a little too much at times. I remember playing, and at times it just felt like they were randomly yapping about something that had no impact to the game, and I kind of wondered why they were even opening their mouths. But nevertheless, it kind of makes the world feel a little bit more alive. With the pawn system, there's a little bit of a twist. You can share your pawns online, and other players can recruit them. When they come back, they can bring knowledge about monsters, quests, or locations that they've learned in someone else's world, and you can also recruit other people's pawns. You can use an advanced search to search for a pawn with specific knowledge about a quest to help you out. So there's a lot of versatility there, and I think it's a really unique feature and kind of a twist on the multiplayer element of this game. For the difficulty curve of the core gameplay, I'd say it's probably moderate. Big enemies definitely take some time and strategy to bring down, but smaller groups like goblins or wolves, they're not very overwhelming. The real challenge is that you're attacked constantly. Every 20 steps or so, I feel like there's wolves, goblins, or bandits just jumping out and attacking you, and it's not difficult, it just feels excessive. I found myself kind of struggling to stick to an objective because of the sheer number of interruptions. Again, it's not too hard, it's just frustrating when I want to move forward, and I can't because there's an enemy at literally every corner behind every bush. It becomes predictable. You're walking down a path, and you did just finish an encounter 30 seconds ago, but there's a new bend in the road. That means there's enemies around the corner. I don't know if maybe this will change further into the game, but so far that's my take, and it's a little excessive. Okay, so overall, how does the core gameplay feel? Well, I really appreciate how real the combat feels. This is really what I want to highlight here in terms of how it feels. One moment that really stood out about the combat feeling real is that a wolf had charged straight at me and knocked me on my feet, grabbed me, and dragged me across the ground. I couldn't move, and I had to call for my pawns to help me out. I'm sure other games have probably done similar things to this, but I personally haven't experienced much like this, so it feels super fresh and visceral. So yeah, overall, the combat just feels really real because of some of these unique things that enemies might do. Again, there's a few too many encounters I've seen so far, but overall the combat feels really real and fluid. Okay, so that wraps up the core gameplay section, and we will move on to the next. In this next section, we will cover the presentation. That will include subsections like graphics and art style, audio and music, as well as performance. So first up with the graphics and art style. The graphics are great. Overall, the world looks incredible. It's hitting close to that dark fantasy theme that I mentioned in my YouTube short. Link below if you haven't seen that yet. My only actual complaint with the graphics or animation is some of the conversations with NPCs. The mouth movement is horrendous. If super deep immersion during conversations is important for you, this may be a deal breaker. It could potentially break the immersion for you. However, it doesn't matter all that much to me, but it's just worth noting. For audio and music, there's no hit music that's pulling me in right off the bat. The music during combat is definitely okay. It makes battle seem a little more intense than if it was silent, but it's just not spectacular. And it's hard in a year that I played and loved Clair Obscur Expedition 33. It's hard to go from a game like that and compare soundtracks. It's just not even fair. Other audio to consider, mainly sound effects, which they're decent. I'm not claiming it's the most immersive experience just because of the sound effects, but they're decent. No real complaints there. In terms of performance, I heard the performance was awful on release, but I'm playing this a little while after. So far, I've had stable performance without any crazy noticeable frame drops, even during some of these crazy combat encounters. I remember at one point a griffin had jumped down and crashed into the road in front of me and got into a big fight with a bunch of other NPCs involved, and there were a lot of entities, particle effects, spells being casted, you name it, and honestly the performance was fine. So yeah, as I mentioned, a little bit of a shorter section, but that covers the overall presentation of the game so far. So the third and final section before we get into pros and cons and my overall recommendations is the engagement and immersion. So we'll talk about the story setup, pacing, and kind of how that all feels. Personally, I wasn't super hooked based on kind of the opening scene there. I've played other games where kind of the intros do kind of hook you in a little bit better, but overall it leads into the tutorial quite well. You kind of cut to an excavation site where you are a prisoner, classic for an RPG, and then from there you get to kind of either create based off a preset character or create a completely customizable character. Once you're done, the main guy there kind of instructs you to follow him, and you go and do the basic tutorial. One element I do like, and it was kind of funny, which kind of relates to the story, is just that main guy is constantly yelling while you're making your character, like, "Is it you? I think you're the one." And he's like trying to confirm if you're the person he's thinking of because you keep flipping between these different presets. I thought that was kind of funny and kind of a nice touch. Once you get out of that initial tutorial area, the story does start to pick up a little bit more. You're brought back to a camp where you're introduced to the pawn system, kind of how that works, why the pawns exist, and that kind of does captivate you a little bit more. But I'd say it wasn't until we went to another town afterwards where we heard of how we became the Arisen. That's really when the story hooked me. Up until then, I found myself not really caring entirely. But once your character receives his memories again, classic, you forgot all your memories, then things start to make sense, and I feel a little bit more driven to see what's next for the Arisen and, how we're going to eventually face off against this dragon in the end, right? One other element I'll touch on that I do find a little captivating. I don't want to give too many spoilers. Again, this is sub 5 hours, so it's not too much, but if you're at all worried that a small story detail may impact your playthrough, go ahead and skip forward to the next section. But basically, there was some kind of almost political conflict with who deserves the throne and what your character has to do to gain that rightful seat back. And I found the conversations leading up to that intriguing about how some of the characters acted, whether they thought you were an imposter or not. And I thought that was, again, a little bit of a captivating experience. But again, overall, I find that the story has a little bit of a slower start. Once you reach the kind of destroyed town and you gain your memories back, I'd say it starts to really pick up and you start to actually care about what's going on and why you're on this journey. So it kind of covers the pacing, again, a little bit slow, but they work in the character creation and tutorial quite well, and it all kind of flows quite well. I'd say in terms of kind of the atmosphere and world building, it's definitely an interesting world to be running around in. Again, like I mentioned in another section, there's a lot of enemies around every corner. But I think that kind of just adds to this is a really dangerous realm, and you need those pawns there to protect you. There's also some neat towers and stuff that you can go in, and you might find NPCs exploring them, and you can tag along and go to the top and find chests and such, so those elements are neat. And I also really like the destructible bridges that are throughout the world. I think those are neat and kind of adds an extra layer to the world building that, hey, this bridge is here, it's not all that strong, and maybe I can break it behind me as I'm escaping from an enemy. So overall, I'd say the atmosphere is quite neat, and you'll find yourself kind of traversing, at least in the early stages, a lot of kind of grassy area, fields, that sort of thing, and a little bit later, close to where I was at the 5-hour mark, going into some caves, which I'd say have really interesting layouts and are fun to explore as well. So pros and cons is up next. I'd say we'll start with the negatives and then we can end it off with some positive touches. But one of the negatives I had has to do with kind of, again, NPCs. This time it's not to do with their dialogue, but with how they act, and some of the times their pathing seems to be glitched. There was one instance where I had to go to a tavern and speak to somebody, and for some privacy, because the conversation was supposed to be a little more secretive, we went out onto kind of this balcony, and during the conversation, the camera was kind of to the side where randomly a NPC in the bar just stood up, walked closer to the frame, and stood there, not in a T-pose, but just looked like they were just placed there in the world with dead eyes staring forward at us. And again, that kind of just like breaks the immersion that like we went out here to not be seen or heard, and all of a sudden we have this NPC who is just downright obsessed with us for some reason. And it just seemed so odd, and it was like that for like a minute and a half to 2 minutes, and only stopped because another NPC walked through them, which I think made the AI of the NPC kind of reset, and then they went and sat down. But it was just extremely odd, and again, if you're going for kind of more of an immersive experience, this kind of thing would probably break it. And I haven't seen a ton more like that, but I would say that if it's happened in the first 5 hours, it's likely to happen again. Another con, and this is one that I've seen in pretty much any discussion about this game, is the travel. So far, at least within the first 5 hours, you were traveling on foot almost the entire time. They do have like ox carts that you can take, but they're only going in a specific direction, and you have to make sure, it's headed in the right direction you want, and they're often attacked anyways. They have an option where you can kind of doze off, they call it, which is obviously just a way to skip time and actually kind of fast travel, but you'll often just wake up and goblins are attacking you anyways, so you might as well just take the road and deal with the 10 encounters that you'll face. So it's a little inconvenient at times since there's no mount system. You have to rely on either your feet or the ox carts, but I think in this time period it does make sense that travel options would be limited, but at least donating a horse for a mount would be nice. You'll spend a lot of time walking, and if you're okay with that because you like to just take in the world, I know some people, when they're playing games, refuse to use mount systems and will just kind of walk around, but if you're not that sort of person and you kind of want to be able to travel faster, you might have some issues with the system. So let's end off here with the pros. I'd say one is the vocations. Not being locked to a specific one is quite nice. You can switch this at any time, and I know a lot of games do this where either armor dictates your class or other things that you can change out easily, but it is just still nice to see it in this game where you're not actually restricted to anything. The pawn system is also a positive. I know we already kind of touched on it, but I do need to call it out as a pro. It's nice to have companions that feel a little more lively with the conversations, and as well as trying to help out when they have knowledge of a specific quest or an enemy. So it does make the adventure, actually adventuring with people, a little better. It's not like some character in another game where they're just a backpack and they walk around and barely say anything. These characters do kind of feel a little bit more real, and it's neat that your pawn can be hired and come back with more knowledge and talk to you about it. So that's really neat. I think that's a good positive for this game. So far, those are my only pros and cons. Again, I'm only 5 hours in, so this list might change drastically, might not. But I'll do a full review once I finish the game. But so far, those are the pros and cons. Alright, so that wraps things up, and we're going to kind of just do my final section and recommendation. So just to kind of summarize, the game feels good. The combat is one of the biggest highlights in terms of the core gameplay. Story doesn't hook you right away, at least not for me personally, but get to about hour 1.5, 2 hours, and you might be a little more hooked. If you like games with a little bit more flexibility in terms of your class, again, there's some positives there here where you can change your vocation. If the pawn system sounds interesting to you, it's definitely a highlight here where you can have some more lively NPCs or companions. So if you're looking for kind of that dark fantasy, gritty adventure game, you are probably going to enjoy this. So my early verdict here for my first impressions is definitely worth continuing past the 5-hour mark. Obviously you're going to have to wait to see my final impressions, but I'd say that if this does come on sale and you think, you'll have a little bit of fun based on some of the stuff you heard here today, it might be time to give it a try. So that's going to do it here for us today. There's my kind of first impressions on Dragon's Dogma 2. If you enjoyed, make sure you drop this video a like and consider subscribing. I'm going to be doing more videos like this, kind of giving my take on games and comparing them to other things I've played and giving my honest opinion of if you should wait till it's on sale or if it's kind of a bad game within the first couple hours. Again, I believe that a game should kind of be exciting within the first 5 hours or so. So if you want to not waste your time on games, consider subscribing because I'll do more. And drop a comment below and let me know maybe what game you want me to do a first impression on next. I'd be happy to do so. So thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one.